So we keep hearing about the exciting future of electric vehicles,
Hmm.
cleaner air, maybe lower running costs down the line.
Right, the promise is there.
But then you look at the reality on the ground in some places and things feel, well, a bit stuck.
Especially in Italy, yeah. That's according to the source we're diving into today.
Okay. And this source, it takes a pretty strong stance, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. It asks a really direct question. Are charging costs actually killing the electric car market there?
Killing that is a strong word. So for this deep dive, what's our mission? What are we trying to get out of this article for you, the listener?
Well, our mission is basically to unpack this piece. We want to understand the structural problems it talks about, the things holding back EV adoption.
And really focus on the charging costs.
Exactly. Really hone in on what it argues is this surprisingly big, maybe even dominant impact of rising charging costs. We're here to pull out the core insights from this source for you.
Got it. Okay, let's jump in. The big picture first, the article says, EV adoption is facing headwinds across Europe.
It does, yeah. But it highlights Italy as being particularly slow, sort of struggling to take off.
And it's not just people being stubborn or resisting for principle, as the article puts it.
No, the source is very clear on that. It argues there are deeper, more fundamental issues at play, structural problems.
Okay. So it points to, well, the usual suspects first, I imagine, like the high purchase price.
Exactly. High initial purchase cost, that's definitely there. And concerns about whether there are enough chargers around, infrastructure availability. Those are mentioned.
But there's something new or newly important.
Yes. The article adds this crucial factor that's apparently become really prominent only quite recently. The high cost of actually operating the car, specifically the price you pay at the charger.
Ah, okay. And this is where the article, well, it gets really interesting, talking about how much things have changed in just a few years.
It's a pretty dramatic shift, the source describes. It reminds us, of a very recent past where driving electric could be incredibly convenient and really cheap, too.
Like how cheap?
Well, think about lots of free public stations which were around. Very inexpensive home charging. And these company subscription plans that offered huge bundles of kilowatt hours at really low prices.
Right.
The article actually mentions rates like 0.30 per kilowatt, even for fast charging back then.
30 cents. Okay, sounds like a different era compared to what the source says is happening now.
It is. The article states those really common, convenient, cheap options, they're largely gone.
Okay. Any examples?
Yeah, it gives specifics. Like Enel X now apparently has a limited city package, only includes 80 kilowatters. And A2A's package, it mentions 106 euro for 200 kilowatters, but, and this is key, it's restricted to stations up to 50 kilowatters.
Okay, so slower charging. What if you're on a long trip then? You need the fast stuff, right? HPC, high power charging, 150 kilowatters or more, the kind you need on a highway.
Right. Then you're basically forced onto the pay-per-use rates. And this is where the article says things reach an authentic folly.
Authentic folly. Wow.
Yeah, with prices climbing up to 0.992060 per kilowatt for that fast, high-power charging. Almost €1 per kilowatt hour.
That's a lot. So the consequence, the article says, is that taking an electric car on a long journey can now cost the same as a petrol car.
Or even more than a petrol car, potentially. And best, maybe it's equal to a diesel car.
Which, as the article points out, is usually cheaper to buy in the first place.
Exactly. So that key economic advantage, that big selling point for EVs, lower running costs, it seems to have just evaporated for public fast charging, according to this source.
Now, the article does mention Tesla, right? Saying they have a bit of an advantage here.
It does, yeah. Tesla users, generally, they benefit from lower rates at their superchargers, which are always pay-per-use, by the way.
Okay.
And interestingly, the source points out that even if you don't own a Tesla, you can actually get access to those lower supercharger rates by paying a subscription. It mentions $12.99 a month.
That sounds better. But there's a catch, isn't there? A limitation for Tesla in Italy specifically.
Yes, the source highlights this. While the prices might be better, the supercharger network itself in Italy is apparently still quite limited. And, crucially, there are no superchargers located directly on the highways.
Which makes long trips, well, complicated.
Impractical is how the article seems to frame it. It means you have to plan everything out really carefully.
And physically leave the highway.
Yeah, you have to exit the autostrada, drive to find a supercharger, charge up, and then get back on the highway again.
That adds time and hassle.
Definitely. And the source contrasts this with options like Free to X, which are located right on the highway and offer fast charging, so they save time.
What?
But the implication is their pricing falls into that general high-cost trend we were just talking about. So the time you save might not feel worth the extra expense for a lot of people.
So the core point the article's making here is that these current charging rates, they effectively kind of restrict many EVs to mostly city use, unless you're willing to pay those really high prices for longer trips.
That seems to be the key takeaway from this section, yeah. It's not just about range anxiety anymore, it's shifting towards cost anxiety, especially when you need to charge publicly and quickly.
Right. In this whole situation, the source describes it, using that phrase, a dog biting its tail cycle, which is quite evocative.
It is. And what's really insightful here, I think, is the article's explanation for why the prices got so high in the first place.
Okay, why?
It links it directly to the really low adoption rate of EVs in Italy, currently sitting at only around 4%, apparently.
Ah, okay. So the logic is companies invested a lot of money putting chargers in.
Exactly.
Huh.
Often with significant public funds, too, from Europe and programs like Italy's own National Recovery and Resilience Plan, the PNRR, as the source mentioned.
Right, the PNRR funds.
So they built the infrastructure, expecting the market to grow. But with so few electric cars actually using these stations,
They have to charge more per session to make the numbers work.
that's the idea. The companies feel they have to raise prices just to try and recoup their investments. The article calls it a kind of physiological consequence of that low usage.
And that creates the vicious cycle. High prices put people off buying EVs.
And the low number of EVs means companies keep prices high, or maybe even raise them more. The dog biting its tail.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The source does suggest that maybe, theoretically, if EV penetration was much higher, say it reached 15 or 20% instead of 4%, then perhaps rates could be lower because of the higher volume. But it's conscious about that.
But the crucial point it makes is about timing, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Oh.
The article argues that cost parity, electric charging costing roughly the same as filling up with petrol or diesel that was sort of expected to happen much later in the transition.
When EVs themselves were cheaper to buy.
Right, when purchase costs had come down and the market was more mature and could handle it, hitting potential buyers with these high operating costs now, when the cars are still expensive and the market is fragile.
It just damages the sector even more.
That's the source's central argument here. It notes that Tesla, because it controls its own supercharger prices and seems to keep them competitive with diesel, is somewhat shielded.
But the rest of the market?
The rest of the market, the article warns, is facing potentially severe negative impacts on sales figures because of these public charging costs.
Okay, so it paints a pretty challenging picture. What about solutions? Does the source suggest any pathways out of this cycle?
It does. The primary solution proposed is, well, pretty straightforward and direct.
Which is?
Bring public charging rates back down to what the article calls human, accessible, acceptable levels. Especially, it stresses, for those high-power chargers that are essential if you want to do long trips conveniently.
Okay, bring prices down. But how? Does it suggest the government should step in? Regulation, maybe?
It floats that idea, yeah. Policy intervention.
Yeah.
Specifically, it mentions the possibility of legislation to calm or maybe even cap charging rates on public land.
Especially for stations built with public money.
Precisely. Particularly for those stations built using public funds, like the PNRR money we mentioned. The idea is to prevent speculation and ensure that public investment actually benefits the public with affordable access.
Interesting. And it also mentions looking back at older ideas, like those subscription packages.
Yeah. Perhaps a bit surprisingly. The article acknowledges that subscriptions can kind of lock you into one provider, which isn't ideal.
Right. Flexibility is usually better.
True. But it suggests, given how high the per-use prices have become, maybe bringing back packages with big bundles of included kilowatt hours could be a necessary step right now. Even if the ultimate goal is still accessible, affordable pay-per-use rates across all operators.
And it seems like there's also a message aimed directly at the charging operators themselves in the article.
Oh, absolutely. The source basically argues to them. Look, by pushing prices too high, you're actually hurting the entire sector. You're shooting yourselves in the foot, long term.
Because fewer EV sales means
Fewer public charging sessions down the road, which ultimately means less revenue for the charging companies themselves. It's counterproductive, the article implies.
it uses that really striking analogy to drive this point home, right?
Yeah, the comparison to streaming services Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, that sort of thing.
How does that work?
Well, it points out that these platforms got huge, by offering really accessible prices initially, right? They drew millions of us in.
Yeah.
But the source argues that their constant price hikes now risk pushing people away, maybe even back towards piracy, making all those years of effort to build up legal digital entertainment potentially vain, as the article puts it.
So the warning is the EV charging sector risks doing the same thing, alienating users before the market even gets going properly.
That seems to be the parallel it's drawing, yeah.
Yeah.
A pretty stark warning about pricing strategy.
Okay. Now, the article does make a distinction, doesn't it? It sounds like the impact of these high costs isn't the same for everyone. Who does it say EVs still work well for?
It's very clear on this. The source states that EVs remain super convenient. That's the phrase used for anyone who can easily charge at home.
Right, if you have a driveway or garage.
Exactly. Or if you can charge reliably at your workplace. And it explicitly says if you're in a position to invest in solar panels for your home to power your charging,
Then it's a no-brainer.
go electric without thinking twice, is the advice in the article. The economics work out brilliantly then.
Okay. And for everyone else, people who rely on public charging.
Well, that's where things get much more complicated, according to the article, at least once you venture outside the city.
So city driving might still be okay, even without home charging.
It suggests buying an EV just for urban use without a home wall box is still possible. But it adds a significant caveat
Which is?
that even positive assessments of that specific scenario written maybe just a couple of years ago, in 2022 for instance, might need serious updating now.
Because the public charging costs have shot up so much since then.
Exactly. The maths might not look as good anymore, even for city-only users relying solely on public infrastructure.
This really brings us back to the core message, doesn't it? What's the most important thing needed to boost EV adoption?
It does. And the source lands on a very strong concluding point here.
Let's hear it.
It argues that capping or, calming these public charging prices is actually needed more right now than giving people incentives to buy the cars in the first place.
Wow, more important than purchase incentives. That
Yeah.
feels kind of counterintuitive. Usually the focus is on making the cars cheaper.
It does feel that way initially, but the article's logic is quite compelling when you think about it. It says, if people can clearly see that owning and running an EV will genuinely save them money compared to their current petrol or diesel car,
It'll make the switch.
they will buy EVs. The source says there's no doubt about that fundamental consumer behavior.
But the risk right now, as the source sees it, is that these charging prices are being pushed up deliberately to be comparable to, or even more expensive than, filling up at a traditional petrol station.
Yes. And if that happens, the article argues, the market just won't grow. Simple as that.
It's about meeting basic financial needs.
Exactly. It stresses that we need to understand and address people's fundamental financial concerns. The source suggests people aren't against EVs in principle. Not really. But they are looking very closely at their wallets.
Understandably.
Of course. So if the car is expensive and the electricity to run it isn't clearly cheaper or is even more expensive than fuel, well, adoption is just going to stall. The market will stay stuck at these low penetration rates, like the current 4% in Italy, despite ambitious targets like 2035 looming on the horizon.
So all the other factors, the article might mention things like potential new purchase incentives, or maybe car prices slowly starting to fall, or even the pace of building more charging stations. None of that solves this core pricing barrier.
That's the central argument the source leaves us with. For the average person thinking about making the switch, the price they pay to refuel, whether it's petrol or electricity, is absolutely paramount. And right now, in Italy at least, the source says that price signal for public charging is actively telling them, don't switch.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up then. If we distill it down, the key insight we've pulled from this deep dive into the source material is pretty clear.
Yeah, it seems to be that the cost of charging, especially public fast charging needed for longer trips, has unexpectedly become a massive barrier, maybe even the single most significant barrier to widespread EV adoption in Italy right now.
It's presented as this critical hurdle that perhaps wasn't expected to hit quite so hard or quite so early in the transition.
Exactly. The focus was maybe too much elsewhere.
Right. So thinking about everything the article laid out, here's maybe a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to mull over, based directly on the source's line of argument. Could it be that ensuring accessible, affordable charging pricing is actually more critical right now than even the sticker price of the EV itself, or the sheer number of chargers on the map? Is that the single most important factor that will ultimately decide if the EV transition succeeds or fails, at least in markets like Italy in the near term?